From the very first day Maya walked into the building, the room seemed to change. Whispers ran across the seats like quick shadows. Some people glanced at her with little smiles that were not kind. Others laughed quietly as if they already knew something about her. Maya kept her head down and walked slowly to her place. She did not complain. She did not ask questions. She just wanted to blend into the background. But blending in was never possible for Maya. She was too quiet, too gentle, and in a world where loud voices ruled, quiet ones were ignored. She spoke carefully and softly, but no one cared to listen. Whenever she raised her hand in class, her words were brushed away like dust on a table. Whenever she suggested something at work, her ideas were dismissed before they even had the chance to grow. She felt invisible even when she stood right in front of them. Everywhere she went, laughter seemed to follow her. Not the warm kind of laughter that makes people feel welcome, but sharp-cutting laughter that carried hidden knives. Some would laugh at her old shoes, some at the way she tied her hair, some even at the way she held her bag too close as if it was her only friend. She was never given a chance to explain herself, and maybe that was the cruelest part of all, because Maya had a story inside her that none of them knew. A story that carried weight, pain, and strength. Maya often asked herself why she was always the target. She was not loud, she did not cause trouble. She was simply there. Yet people treated her as if she was less than them. They made jokes about her silence, saying maybe she was too shy, maybe she was too scared, maybe she was just strange. Their voices rolled together like waves crashing against her heart. But she never fought back, not because she was weak, but because she believed one day silence would speak louder than noise. There were moments when Maya wished she could just disappear, when she walked down the hall and felt eyes on her, whispers buzzing like bees. She wanted to vanish into thin air, but she could not. She had to keep going. She had to keep showing up every day, even if she felt crushed on the inside. She would stand straight and walk into the room, because no matter how much they mocked her, she knew she carried something they would never understand, something she had promised herself she would keep hidden until the right time. The cruel words came often. One person once laughed loudly and said Maya probably had no dreams at all. Another said she was wasting her life. Another said her silence proved she had nothing to give. Their words filled the air like smoke, choking her spirit. But Maya's eyes always told a different story. Her eyes were not weak, they carried storms. But the storms were carefully locked away. She would not let them see. The truth was that Maya lived with memories most of them could not imagine. Memories of nights filled with tears. Memories of promises made to herself and to someone she loved deeply. She carried all of that close to her skin, so close that it was inked permanently into her body. A mark she never revealed. A mark that told her who she was and what she had survived. But no one around her had any idea. And so they kept laughing, not knowing the secret she held. The days turned into weeks. The mocking grew sharper. People found new ways to point out her quietness, her plain clothes, her small mistakes. One day she dropped her notebook in front of the room, and instead of helping, they laughed as if it was a great comedy show. Maya picked it up slowly, her hands shaking, her face calm but her heart breaking. And in that moment she wondered how people could be so blind, how they could laugh at someone without knowing the battle she carried inside. Maya often walked home alone at night, the streets empty, the world silent, and in that silence she felt safer. No one laughed, no one mocked. It was just her and the echo of her footsteps. She would hold her arm close to her body, the very arm that carried her secret tattoo, and she would whisper to herself that one day the truth would show. One day they would stop laughing. One day the silence would be theirs and not hers. Her story was not about weakness, though that was all people thought they saw. Her story was about holding pain quietly until the world could see. And though she seemed small, though she seemed unnoticed, Maya's strength was waiting beneath the surface, unseen but powerful. And the day was coming when everything would change, because Maya was not just the quiet girl, not just the invisible one. She was someone who carried fire beneath her skin, and when the time came to reveal it, the same people who laughed at her would have nothing left to say. Their voices would fall silent, and in that silence Maya would finally rise. The days kept moving, but the way people treated Maya never changed. Every time she entered the room, the air filled with whispers, laughter, and rolling eyes. It was as if mocking her had become a game, a form of entertainment that made them feel powerful. Maya knew it, and she felt it every single moment. Yet she stayed calm. She kept walking with her head down, pretending not to hear, pretending not to feel. But deep inside her chest, every cruel word was carving a scar. One morning the sun was bright outside, but the room felt heavy. Maya walked in holding her books tightly against her chest, hoping to just sit quietly and finish the day. But as soon as she took her seat, a sharp voice called out her name. It was one of the loudest bullies, someone who always needed attention. He smiled wide and said that Maya must be the most boring person alive. Others laughed and clapped as if it was the funniest joke in the world. Maya's hands tightened on her books, but her face stayed still. It never stopped at small comments. They wanted more. They wanted to see her break. Another voice joined in, saying Maya probably never went anywhere exciting. That she probably had no friends. That she lived in silence because no one wanted to be with her. The laughter grew like a storm, filling every corner of the room, bouncing off the walls until it pressed into Maya's ears and heart. She sat frozen, her eyes lowered, her lips closed. But her silence was not weakness, it was survival, and it was patience. The cruel jokes continued day after day. Once she tripped on the step while carrying her bag, and instead of helping, they laughed until tears came from their eyes. They pointed and shouted that Maya was too clumsy, too stupid, too quiet, too strange. Maya bent down, picked up her bag, and walked to her seat as if nothing touched her. But inside her chest the fire grew hotter, burning but hidden, waiting for a moment when it would no longer stay inside. Another afternoon the group sat together, whispering loudly, pretending to share secrets about Maya. One of them said she probably had nothing interesting about her, that if people could see through her skin, they would only find emptiness. The words hit hard, but Maya stayed silent. The group laughed louder, pointing at her, calling her invisible, calling her a shadow. Their laughter filled the space like cruel music. But behind Maya's silence there was a truth that none of them could even imagine. Maya carried a secret that gave her strength, a secret she had promised herself to keep hidden until the day it was needed. And that secret was written on her very skin. Every time they laughed, every time they mocked her, she remembered the ink pressed deep into her arm, a design that held her story, her pain, her promise, her love, her loss. She remembered the night she got it, the tears she cried, the fire she felt, and she reminded herself that no matter what they said, she was not weak. She was not empty. The cruel joke reached its peak on a cold day when the room was crowded. Maya sat in the back corner as usual, trying to stay invisible, but the bullies were restless. One of them stood up and said loudly that Maya should tell a joke to entertain them. The others clapped and laughed. Waiting to see her stumble, Maya shook her head softly, but that only made them louder. They shouted that she was too boring to speak, that her voice would probably put everyone to sleep. The entire room erupted in laughter that stung like glass against skin. Maya's hands trembled slightly, but her face stayed calm. She looked at them quietly, her eyes dark and deep. The laughter echoed, but inside her heart a decision was forming. She realized they would never stop. Not unless she gave them a reason, not unless she showed them the truth that lived beneath her sleeve. She breathed slowly, telling herself to wait, telling herself the moment was close, telling herself that silence can break when it chooses to. The cruel joke was meant to destroy her spirit, but what they did not know was that it was building her strength. Each laugh was fuel, each insult was fire, and though she sat there with her head lowered, Maya was not the broken girl they believed her to be. She was a storm hiding behind calm skies, and when that storm finally broke, the same people who laughed would find themselves silent, their voices lost in the weight of her truth. So while they laughed at her that day, while they clapped and mocked her name, Maya sat quietly with her books pressed against her chest. Her lips closed, her heart steady, her eyes unshaken, and in her mind she whispered the promise she had carried for years. The promise that one day the ink on her skin would speak louder than every cruel word they had ever thrown at her. The promise that when her story was revealed, the room that had always mocked her would finally fall silent. The cruel laughter filled the air again, sharp and heavy. But this time Maya felt something inside her shift. She had endured enough. Every joke, every whisper, every insult had piled upon her shoulders for too long. She had carried them like stones pressed into her back. But now the weight was too much. Her silence was no longer hiding her weakness. Her silence was hiding her power, and the time had come to let that power breathe. As the voices grew louder, someone shouted that Maya should prove she even belonged there. Another voice called her useless. Another said she was like a shadow on the wall, invisible and unwanted. The room burst into laughter once more. Yet in the middle of that storm, Maya slowly placed her books on the desk, her hands steady, her eyes calm, her heart beating like a drum inside her chest. and without a word she reached for her sleeve. The sleeve was long, always covering her arm, and nobody ever questioned it. They thought it was her style, or maybe just her way of hiding her shyness. But in truth it was a shield, a cover that protected her secret from eyes that were not ready to see it. Now she pinched the fabric with her fingers and pulled it upward. The motion was small and quiet, but it carried the weight of thunder. The laughter began to fade as people noticed what she was doing. At first there was silence mixed with curiosity. Some tilted their heads, some leaned forward, expecting perhaps another reason to laugh. Maybe they thought she had a scar. Maybe they thought she was hiding something silly. But when the fabric slid back and the ink beneath was revealed, the entire room froze. The laughter died in their throats, and not a single sound remained except the steady rhythm of Maya's breath. The tattoo was not random. It was not decoration. It was a story written on her skin. A story in shapes and lines and shadows. It spread across her arm in bold strokes, black and strong. A mark that spoke without words. It carried meaning, it carried weight, it carried memory. And those who saw it could not look away, because it was not just a picture. It was a truth that demanded respect. Some eyes widened in shock, others filled with confusion, and a few even held guilt, because they understood at least a small piece of what the tattoo meant. It was a symbol of sacrifice, a reminder of someone who had fought, someone who had lost, someone whose memory lived through Maya. It was a bond carved into her skin, a promise to never forget, a vow to stand strong even when mocked and broken. Maya did not speak. She simply held her arm steady, letting the ink tell its story, letting the silence grow deeper. And in that silence, the bullies who once laughed now sat still. Their smiles vanished, their voices gone, their laughter replaced with an emptiness they could not escape. They had mocked her for being weak, but in that moment they realized they had been mocking someone who carried more strength than all of them combined. The room felt different now. The air heavy, but not with laughter. Heavy with truth. The kind of truth that cannot be ignored. Maya's eyes met theirs one by one, not with anger, not with revenge, but with calm strength. She had nothing to prove. She had always known who she was. But now they finally saw a glimpse of it, and that glimpse was enough to silence them completely. Her tattoo was a symbol of love and loss, of courage and survival, of battles that none of them had ever faced. Maybe it was for her father, a man who had given everything and left her with this legacy. Maybe it was for her mother, a woman who taught her to rise again after every fall. Or maybe it was for herself, for the night she cried alone and promised never to give up. Whatever the truth was, the tattoo carried it all, and they could feel it without a single word being spoken. Some of them lowered their eyes in shame. Others stared but could not find their voices. The room that once echoed with cruel laughter was now filled with silence so deep it almost hurt. Silence that demanded reflection. Silence that forced them to see her differently. And Maya stood there calm and unshaken, her sleeve rolled back, her secret revealed, her silence no longer a weakness but a weapon. She did not smile. She did not frown. She simply stood still as if to say, "This is who I am. This is my truth, and you will never laugh at me the same way again." Her silence spoke louder than their laughter ever could, and in that silence she found her strength. Strength that had always been there but was finally seen. The moment passed slowly, stretching like a long shadow, and in that stretched silence the bullies who once mocked her realized they could never look at Maya the same way again. The girl they had dismissed, the girl they had laughed at, the girl they had treated like nothing, had become the girl who silenced them all with nothing more than the ink on her arm and the story it carried. And for the first time in a long time, Maya felt the weight lift from her chest. Not because they stopped mocking her, but because she had chosen to reveal her truth. She had shown them who she really was, and no laughter could ever erase that. The room that had always been filled with noise was now silent. It was not the soft silence of peace, but the heavy silence of realization, the kind that pressed on every chest and made every heart beat faster. Maya stood with her sleeve rolled back, her tattoo alive on her skin, and not a single voice dared to rise. The same people who had mocked her now stared at her with wide eyes, frozen in their seats, unable to laugh, unable to speak. The ink on her arm carried a power they could not understand. It was bold and strong, shaped in a way that told a story without words. Some of them knew enough to guess its meaning. Others simply felt it in their bones, but all of them sensed that it was something sacred, something untouchable, something that demanded respect. The laughter that once echoed around her seemed childish now, cruel and foolish. and none of them could find the courage to continue it. Maya stood still, her face calm, her eyes steady. She did not need to explain herself. She did not need to shout or cry. The tattoo spoke for her. It told them that she was more than the quiet girl they had dismissed. It told them that she carried pain, memory, and courage on her very skin. It told them that she was not invisible. She was not weak. She was someone who had faced storms they could never imagine. And suddenly the room felt too small to hold that truth. The bullies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them, who had laughed the loudest, now looked down at the floor. Unable to meet her eyes, another bit his lip nervously, as if realizing that his words had carried a cruelty too deep to ever take back. Some whispered softly to each other, but even their whispers were broken and unsure. Nothing was the same anymore, because the girl they thought they knew had just changed before their eyes. For Maya, the silence was not empty. It was full of every cruel word that had been thrown at her, full of every moment she had endured in quiet pain, and now full of the truth that was finally revealed. She breathed slowly and deeply, feeling lighter than she had in years. The sleeve that had always hidden her strength was no longer a shield. Now it was open, and her truth was free. She remembered the night she got the tattoo, the cold air outside, the trembling in her hands, the tears that slid down her cheeks as the needle pressed into her skin. She had chosen the design carefully. Every line had meaning, every curve carried a memory. It was not just art, it was her story, her history, her promise. She had told herself that one day this mark would protect her, and in that moment she saw that her promise was real. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. Every second felt long, and yet Maya did not move. She let them sit in their discomfort. She let them feel the weight of their own actions. She did not need revenge. She did not need to insult them back. Their own shame was enough, and that shame grew deeper with every breath they took as they looked at the ink on her arm. Someone finally whispered her name, not with laughter this time, but with a tone that was almost soft, almost respectful. Another shifted in his chair and muttered that maybe they had been wrong. Maybe they should stop. Their voices were weak, breaking under the weight of what they had seen. They were no longer in control. The power was no longer in their laughter. The power was now in Maya's silence. Her eyes moved across the room. Meeting theirs one by one, she did not glare. She did not smile. She simply looked at them with calm strength, and those looks pierced deeper than any insult ever could. Because now they knew, now they understood at least a small piece of who she was, and the truth was enough to silence them more completely than anger ever could. The quiet grew so strong that even the sound of a chair creaking felt loud. The bullies who had once shouted with confidence now sat small and weak, their faces pale, their lips pressed shut. They had thought Maya was nothing, but now they saw that she carried everything. Everything that mattered, everything that gave her strength, everything that made them realize their cruelty was meaningless. Maya slowly pulled her sleeve back down, covering the tattoo again, but the silence did not fade. The mark was hidden once more, but its memory stayed alive in their minds. They knew now that the quiet girl they dismissed was far stronger than they could ever be, and the thought of it filled them with unease. Because they understood they could never laugh at her again, not without remembering the ink, the story, and the strength behind her silence. She gathered her books with steady hands, stood from her seat, and walked across the room, her footsteps echoing loudly in the stillness. No one dared to stop her, no one dared to whisper, no one dared to laugh. They all sat frozen, listening to the sound of her leaving, and that sound carried more weight than all their jokes combined. And as Maya walked out the door, she felt something new in her heart. Not anger, not bitterness, but freedom. For the first time, she felt like the laughter had lost its power. For the first time, she felt that her silence had spoken, and in that silence she found her victory. A victory that no one could take away. The silence that Maya created did not end when she walked out of the room. It followed everyone who had laughed at her. It stayed heavy in their minds, haunting them like a shadow that could not be shaken away. The image of the tattoo burned deep in their memory, and no matter how hard they tried, they could not laugh about it. They could not joke about it. They could not pretend it was nothing, because it was everything. It was the truth that had broken through their cruelty. The next day Maya walked in again, her steps calm, her head held straight, and this time the room did not roar with laughter. Instead, the air felt heavy and strange. People looked at her but quickly looked away. Some lowered their heads, some shuffled uncomfortably in their chairs. The same voices that once called her names were silent, afraid to speak, unsure what to say. Maya walked quietly to her place and sat down, her face calm, her heart steady. She did not need to speak because the shift had already begun. The bullies who had once felt powerful now felt small. One of them tried to start a joke, but his voice cracked and faded into silence. No one joined him. No one laughed, and he sat down quickly, embarrassed. Another who had always teased her avoided her completely. His eyes glued to the table, his hands restless as if he was carrying guilt he could not confess. The change was real, and Maya could feel it like a wind that had suddenly turned in her favor. For the first time in a long time, Maya felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She no longer carried their words like stones. She no longer feared their laughter like thunder. She had shown them her truth, and now they carried the silence, not her. She walked through the halls without the usual whispers behind her back. People moved aside not out of fear but out of respect. Respect they had never given her before. Respect she had earned without saying a single word. Some of them even tried to be kind. One girl who had once laughed the loudest now smiled softly at her, a smile that seemed nervous but honest. She whispered that maybe Maya was stronger than anyone there. Maya did not respond. She simply nodded slightly, not out of pride but out of calm acceptance. She did not need their kindness to know her worth. She had already found it within herself, but the change was there, and it was undeniable. Her tattoo had spoken for her, and though it was hidden again beneath her sleeve, its power lingered. It was like a flame that had been lit in the dark, a flame that could not be unseen. Every time they looked at her, they remembered the lines of ink, the strength it carried, the story it hinted at, and they knew they could never dismiss her again. Not as they once did. Not as the weak and invisible girl they had mocked. The turning point was not only in how they treated her, it was also in how Maya saw herself. She walked with more confidence, not loud, not arrogant, but steady. She no longer lowered her eyes when others stared. She no longer hid behind silence out of fear. Her silence was now strength. Her silence was now a choice, and that choice gave her freedom. Freedom from the chains of their cruelty. One afternoon when she entered the room, no one laughed. Instead, there was a hush of respect. The same hush that once followed powerful leaders. It was strange to them. Strange to Maya too, but it was real. They saw her differently, and she carried herself differently. She no longer carried the pain of their words. She carried the strength of her truth, and that strength made her shine in ways they could not ignore. Some of them wanted forgiveness, but Maya did not give them words. She gave them only her silence. A silence that reminded them of their past cruelty. A silence that made them feel the weight of their actions, and that was enough. She did not need to forgive them to move forward. She only needed to keep walking, and she did, each step stronger, each step freer, each step closer to the life she deserved. The turning point was not in their change. It was in hers. She no longer needed them. She no longer sought their approval. She no longer cared for their laughter or their whispers. She had found her strength, and it was hers alone. The tattoo was not only ink on her skin, it was a shield. It was a voice. It was her story. And with it she could walk through fire without fear. And so Maya lived that new truth each day. Quiet but powerful. Soft but unshaken. And though the world around her had mocked her, now the world bowed to her silence. Her story had changed. Her place had changed. And she had changed too. Forever Maya never wanted revenge. She never wanted to hurt the people who had hurt her. What she had always wanted was simple. She wanted respect. She wanted to be seen. She wanted to be heard without laughter drowning her voice. And though she had not spoken a single word, her silence had finally spoken for her. It had silenced the room. It had silenced the cruelty. And it had given her back her strength. The days moved forward and the change remained. No one dared to mock her anymore. The whispers that once followed her footsteps were gone. The cruel jokes that once echoed behind her back had faded into silence. Even the loudest bullies could no longer look her in the eye. Their pride had been broken by the truth on her skin. The truth they could not deny. Maya no longer walked through the halls like a shadow. She walked like someone who carried light, and that light made people step aside with quiet respect. She felt different too. She felt taller, though her height had not changed. She felt stronger, though her body was the same. What had changed was inside her. Her heart no longer carried the heavy stones of their words. Her heart now carried freedom. She knew she did not need to explain herself to anyone. She did not need to prove her worth with speeches or arguments. The tattoo had done it for her. And even more than that, her silence had proven it. There were moments when people tried to come close. Some offered apologies, their voices soft, their eyes filled with shame. Others tried to smile at her, trying to show kindness where once they had shown cruelty. Maya listened, but she did not answer with long words. She gave them only nods or calm glances because forgiveness was not what she needed. She did not need to erase the past. She only needed to move forward, and she was moving forward with every step she took. Her true victory was not that they stopped mocking her. Her true victory was that she no longer cared for their voices. She no longer needed them to see her strength. She no longer waited for their respect. She carried respect within herself. She carried her own power. She carried her own truth, and that was more than enough. It was something no laughter could take away, something no cruel word could destroy. The tattoo was more than ink. It was her shield, her story, her fire. It reminded her of where she had come from, of what she had survived, of the promises she had made on dark nights when she thought she could not go on. It reminded her that even when the world laughed, she was never weak, she was never nothing. She was always strong, even in silence, and now the world knew it too. One evening, Maya stood by her window, the sky painted with shades of gold and red. She rolled back her sleeve and looked at the tattoo again. She touched it softly with her fingertips, and a quiet smile grew on her lips. Not the smile of pride, but the smile of peace. She whispered to herself that she had made it. She had endured the storm. She had carried the pain, and she had risen from it stronger than ever. Her silence had not been a cage. It had been her power all along. From that day forward, Maya walked with a new kind of strength. Not loud, not boastful, but calm and steady. People noticed it in the way she carried herself, in the way she met their eyes, in the way she no longer bent beneath their judgment. She was no longer the girl dismissed and mocked. She was the girl who had silenced a room with nothing but her truth, and that truth could never be taken away. Her story spread quietly, whispered from one person to another, not as gossip, but as respect. People told each other about the girl who had been mocked until she revealed the tattoo that silenced everyone. They spoke of her strength, they spoke of her courage, and slowly the whispers that once tore her down became whispers that lifted her name with admiration. Maya never asked for it, but it came, because real strength cannot stay hidden forever. Maya's victory was not in the way others treated her now. It was in the way she treated herself. She no longer doubted her worth. She no longer questioned her place. She no longer felt small. She had found her voice in silence. She had found her shield in ink, and she had found her freedom in truth. And that freedom carried her into each new day with steady steps and a fearless heart. The world may still have people who laugh at those who are different. It may still have voices that try to crush others with cruelty. But Maya had learned the greatest lesson, that their laughter does not define you, that their words do not decide your worth, that one truth, one story, one scar, one tattoo, can silence every cruel voice in the room. And once that silence comes, no one can take it away. And so Maya lived with her head held high, no longer hiding, no longer bending, no longer carrying their cruelty. She carried only herself, her story, her strength. And in that she found peace, in that she found freedom, and in that she found her true victory.